Welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about the limits of human understanding. Limits of perception, limits of expression, limits of language, trying to understand whether there's anything that the human brain couldn't understand, and also the inherent limitations of our ability to give expression to the world around us. So let's ask this question first. Could it be possible that there are concepts that the human brain just cannot fathom, could not understand? Immediately my brain goes to dimensions. So we're talking about spatial dimensions here. And it's interesting to note that we live in a three-dimensional world here. This reality is a three-dimensional world. And the fourth dimension is time. And I wonder whether you've ever actually considered that one of the four dimensions that we interact with on this plane is utterly and completely different from the other three. For some unknown reason, time exists as a dimension, and it is unlike the other three dimensions that we experience on a daily basis. I'll leave you with that thought. Let's go to the spatial dimensions. From a two-dimensional plane to then add a third dimension which extends upwards or downwards, you give a space which was just area, you give it volume, because then it becomes enclosed air, I guess. Whereas on the two-dimensional plane, it is just purely, if you can imagine, a quantum thick two-dimensional plane. There is no space in that two-dimensional area. The best thing you could hope to do is plot points on that two-dimensional graph. But when you add a third dimension, it introduces volume. Volume is the space that we experience in this reality. But add another dimension. So sorry, just to tidy that up, what you're doing is you're introducing an element that was in the two-dimensional plane completely unexpected or totally foreign to the way that you would measure or plot the area, the area of a two-dimensional plane. You introduce this concept called volume when you add the third dimension. So when the brain thinks about this, we understand it because, look, my hands are moving around in the space, right? This is volume that my hands are moving around within. But adding another dimension to the three dimensions that we have introduces, on the same level of unexpectedness, the same level of newness, novelty, something that scientists have termed hypervolume or four volume, because that type of volume that scientists have termed hypervolume is utterly different to the volume that we experience in a three-dimensional space. Hypervolume. Now, we may be able to just rationally explain that, and perhaps you can understand it on some level. I mean, I struggle with it myself, to be utterly honest. Like, what could hypervolume actually mean? It's just a word, right? But conceptually, you think that, okay, it's the difference between a two-dimensional plane and a three-dimensional volumetric display, volumetric reality. Then you go hypervolumetric in the fourth dimension. And then 5 volume if you add a fifth dimension. Crikey, it just cooks the brain, honestly. But at each step, a new and novel type of area volume is created that for the person who exists in that realm, in that plane, would just have been like absolutely mind-blowing to imagine. So that is the spatial dimension, right? They say that you can visualize higher dimensions by the same way that, for example, if you took a 3-dimensional cube and just shone a light on it from the top and cast a shadow onto the desk, that you could see and manipulate the cube so that you can see all of its facets. Well, they say that you can do that as well with the higher dimensions. Reduce those shapes down to a 2-dimensional level. Now, look, I've done a little bit of research into that and I'm not 100% certain about it, but that's, what the scientists are saying. The reason that I'm unsure is because I guess it's impossible for the human brain, as far as I know and as far as I can sort of tell, I have not been able to find anyone to give expression to a 4 or 5-dimensional shape. I think they call it a tesseract, is a 4-dimensional shape, I believe. And the shape has the ability to sort of like turn in on itself, and I don't know, a tesseract. You can look it up on YouTube. It's interesting stuff, but just visualizing that alone, it might be possible that in the future someone will come up with a way for the human brain to understand multiple dimensions. But I tend to think that if we haven't cracked that already, then it may be impossible for us to actually imagine it. That cooks the noodle pretty hard, right? Now imagine this. We live in a 4-dimensional world, right? The 4th dimension is time. So what happens if you add an additional time dimension? Just completely blows the brain, okay? Because, I mean, what would that mean for time? Would it mean that with this additional time dimension that you could kind of like step out of a timeline into a space where you could see a whole timeline just from start to finish? Could you, I would assume with multiple time dimensions that you could travel between times in that single time dimension. It's even hard to give expression to this because it is so foreign to the brain. It's entirely possible that there are multiple time dimensions and we are only exposed to the one. There could be other dimensions that we haven't even thought possible. For example, I'm just going to hypothesize here, but what if there was a dimension of thought? What if thinking was a dimension and we just tune into it to have an individuated experience, and we experience that as our individuated selves, but perhaps with additional dimensions of thought, you could tap into the universal consciousness and converse with other people across space and time. These are the sorts of things that I believe the human brain will always lack an understanding of. Another thing that limits us is that we communicate in language. And imagine this, right? Communicating in language is like taking the whole universe and compressing it down to a number of, like, just a sequence, pops and clicks and vowels, and how could that possibly, how could reducing reality down to mouth sounds possibly be expressive of the universe that we live in? I hope you'll agree with me that it's impossible for that to happen, that we could not possibly hope to even come close to expressing the reality that we live in with our complex mouth sounds. The reason why is because as humans, we need to be able to give expression to something in an ultra limited way so that we can have the sensation, the essence, capture the essence, if you will, of that concept, that item, that visualization, that emotion. If we can capture what we believe to be the essence of that, then we stick that label on it and we call it sad. We call it love. We call it beauty. We call it darkness. We call it light. These things are the most complex, integrated, interrelated phenomena that are all part of the whole. Imagine that you could create a word for something, whatever it is, a table, let's say, that if someone heard it and understood the language that you were talking about, no, not even understood the language, you were able to speak what the table was with naming it in a particular way. And immediately, whoever hears this sound coming out of your mouth understands the full implication and integration of table within the requirements of our society, the substantive matter of it, the time, duration of its existence, the way that it was conceived and developed over time and utilized. And that's how impossible it is for us to, if we call something table, all of these implied things, they just evaporate immediately. And we reduce the item down to a utility so that we can understand it and move on with our lives. But everything is like this. Everything down to the quantum level. For example, the word quantum means like bit, right? Imagine if you could imagine like a bit, right? A bit is an indivisible part of the whole, okay? That's what they call a quanta. So on the quantum scale, because you're looking at such a small arrangement of particles, that's why they call it the quantum realm, because it's made up of almost the fundamental particles of our reality. to the extent that the Planck length is as small a measurement as you can measure without creating, see, because every time you measure something, you need to put more and more energy so you can see deeper and deeper into the fathomless depths of our reality. More and more energy you put into it, at some point, you've put so much energy in there that you collapse into a black hole. That's what they call the Planck length. And it may be that just theoretically you cannot see below the Planck length because you create a black hole, or it may be that it's impossible to see below the Planck length, like it is impossible to travel faster than the speed of light, because it's one of the fundamental barriers of our reality. And that at the Planck length, that is the smallest unit of measure that this reality exists within, can create. That's the smallest quanta that it can create. All of those words that I just said are pointing to something. They're trying to give expression to something that is quite fundamental to our reality. But every single one of those words is just me putting a label so that I can try and express something. And those labels, they are purely designed from the ground up to simplify things into little chunks so that we can just move on and forget about the fathomless depth of every single word that I just said. It's a bit self-defeating, isn't it? But unfortunately, it is the reality that we live in. Perception. So I've got to give a shout out to Natalia here, because I just had a conversation with her just on one of her posts that she shared. So shout out, Natalia. And it's about the limitations of our perception. So if you could imagine this, right? There's an article that I found which was about a woman that they found that had a different color receptor in her eye. In her eyes had a different color receptor. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean that that person can see colors that no one else can? It's possible, right? It's possible that the shape of the cones in her eyes just filter a different type of light, and that the way that that person perceives red may be different to the way that all of us experience red. However, it's also possible that she can see a whole different range of colors that we can't. Limitations of our perception are as innate as our inability to look far away. There is as significant as our inability to see to the microscopic level or to behold on a galactic scale. Our limitations for our perception extend into the spiritual realm as well, where we normally cannot communicate without these verbal mouth noises that we use. Obviously, you can write to each other or whatever, but I'm saying without language, without some kind of physical expression, we can't communicate. But it might be entirely possible that if we had a higher level of perception, that we could pick up on these things and actually communicate out. Perception is hearing, it's feeling, it's seeing, it's all of the senses. There may be senses that we are not even aware of. For example, if we didn't understand what smell was, for example, If nobody was ever born with a nose, right, then we would assume that smell is something that you can only detect for the purposes of checking whether something is poisonous or, with a machine, right? For example, we can't see gamma rays, for example, so we need a Geiger counter, right? But it would be, if we had the sensory perception to be able to see those radiations, then we wouldn't need a Geiger counter, and we would have the ability, and who knows what else that would unlock. Who knows? We're limited in our ability to perceive. We're limited in every way. Now, what's the outcome of this? The outcome is that we got to stay humble, So many of us out there just feel like we've got shit sorted out. We don't. We have no idea what we're doing, what we're giving birth to, artificial intelligence, genetic modification. We have no idea the things that we're playing with. Stay humble. Understand the fact that we've been given this time to inhabit this world, I believe, just to be here as an observer. Stay humble. Don't allow yourself to be taken up by this holier than thou kind of mentality that you think that we've got everything sorted out. We don't. We have no idea. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for making it this far in the video. Click that like, click the subscribe if you like, and I'll catch you next week. Thanks.